So my name is Ashton Keyes. I'm actually from Detroit, Michigan, and I work for Science Gallery right now as a student designer. So one of my duties as a student designer was to lead the fashion theme talk. I'm actually a fashion designer. I run my own brand called 96. So I actually took the initiative to take this intersection and put it out and bring fashion and sustainability and science to Detroit. So one of the things that I thought about when I put this together is that I wanted to have a broad spectrum of ideas and creatives. So each panelist has sustainability in their practice, but it's different from the angle. So Kristen Berkey from Laszlo is very in the production side, very production-minded. Rosalind is very fashion-orientated, and then Mandisa, she is very creative and artsy and artistic. So I wanted to get every angle of sustainability in the industry of fashion. So that's why I decided to pick each and every one to touch on different pieces of what sustainability in fashion looks like. Yeah, so I'm excited to bring this opportunity for a lot of people to learn about something that they may not talk about on an everyday basis. I really hope that everyone leaves this talk and think about what they wear, maybe check the tags and check like what materials and fabrics they wear on a daily basis. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, MOCAD. My name is Jova, and I am a Ford Foundation Curatorial Fellow here at MOCAD. And I'm so excited that you all came out tonight for the intersection. So thank you for being here. Before I turn the mic over to our lovely moderator, Ashton Keyes, I just wanted to say a little bit about the intersection and thank our sponsors. So the intersection is a program that is a collaboration between Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit and Science Gallery Lab Detroit. We are looking at the intersection and thinking of science and art and thinking about creative ways that artists or makers sort of explore these themes within their work. We are sponsored by Michigan State University Federal Credit Union, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Ford Foundation, and Michigan State University. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashton, but I thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Don't worry if you didn't get a shirt yet. We will have time at the end of the night to do that as long as we still have shirts. And thank you guys so much for being here. And at the end of the program, I'll tell you about our next intersection and the Science Gallery Lab's opening, which is coming in June. Cool. Thanks, guys.
So first off, I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight and being able to experience this with all of us. So to my left, we have three amazing individuals, three amazing artists, designers, or whatever you want to, I guess consist of that. So right now, my name is Ashton Keyes. I am a senior at Michigan State University, and I currently work for Science Gallery. So this is a project that I've been put on when I first started this semester to bring together science and fashion. So I went out and reached out to some amazing individuals, amazing artists to my left. So give them a round of applause for being able to do this for us tonight. So just to start off, we would like to have them introduce themselves, introduce the project that they're working on, and talk about a little bit about their process. So you can start off with Mr. Kristen Berkey.
Hey, thanks for being here. My name's Christian Berkey. I run a company called Laszlo. We're based in Detroit and have been for the last few years. But my background is really not in fashion. That's just a more recent addition to it. I kind of grew up doing social and environmental justice work. Started my first company when I was 11. It was an earth-friendly lawn service, and it involved a pony, believe it or not. But I kind of had a chance to work on projects around the world and was, from working with former child soldiers in Liberia to land conservation in western Michigan, was really focused on how I could use, my life to make the world a better place, which I'm sure most of us are considering in our daily lives. So at some point, as I was on that trajectory, I realized that despite all of this work, I had a closet filled with stuff that was made in ways that didn't line up with how I was trying to live my life. So whether that was toxic chemicals being used in dyeing clothing, or whether it was labor conditions in garment factories around the world, it was pretty clear that there was a disconnect between how I was living and how I was dressing. So I really kind of came to terms with that in 2013, right as I was graduating college with a degree in prison policy, and said, all right, how can I bring together an interest in working in criminal justice reform with an interest in making clothes that both look good and have a story that means something to me. So ended up in Detroit, starting Laszlo, and spending 3 years trying to make the best white t-shirt in the world, where best included what it was made of, who it was made by, and where it was made. So we spent months sourcing the highest quality organic cotton grown in the US, an organic Supima cotton, custom made a fabric, and then set up a cut and sew shop over at Pony Ride in Corktown, and worked with the Department of Corrections to hire someone who had learned to sew while he was behind bars for a 22-year prison sentence, and hired him, interviewed him while he was still incarcerated, and hired him as soon as he got out, and had this absolutely amazing, life-changing chance to work with a truly incredible individual, but said, you know, this is a very simple item, but we're trying to use it to tell a story about the impact that fashion can have in the world. So I still have Laszlo. We're doing some stuff with workforce development in Detroit, but I also now spend some time in the investment world looking at the new coming materials and technologies that are changing the fashion industry for the better, both on the waste side of things as well as on so reusing old materials, as well as new technologies that are efficient, sustainable, et cetera. So kind of balancing the creative design world with technology and innovation.
Mandy.
Hi, I'm Mandy Smith, and I am co-owner of Detroit Fiberworks, located in Northwest Detroit. In my previous life, I worked in automotive management for a very long time. I have an MBA from the University of Michigan, but after retiring, I decided to pursue my passion. I am a fiber artist, and the two processes that I work in most frequently are felting and eco-printing. So with felting, I am using wool fibers and transforming them into fabric. And there's some examples of my work up front. And with eco-printing, I am taking plant material like leaves and onion skins and flowers, and using them to infuse the colors from those materials into fabric. So that's it. I don't know. Did I miss something? I feel like I didn't talk very long. We have a whole hour.
Rosalind.
Okay, I'm Rosalind Karamoko. I am the founder and the CEO of Detroit is the New Black. I started the company, I guess, soft launch 2014, and then full throttle 2015. My first career actually was as a buyer for Saks Fifth Avenue, so I really am approaching design more from a buying or merchant standpoint than really a design standpoint. So my process is really about who is the customer, who is the end user, and what is their lifestyle? What can they afford? How do they live? And what do they want, essentially? And so, when I started the brand, I really wanted to do something 100% made and manufactured here in Detroit. But I think there are a lot of ways to look at sustainability. So you have the social aspect of it, you have the environmental aspect of it, and you have the economic aspect of it. And so I wanted a brand that was not just sustainable from a sourcing standpoint, but also sustainable from a product standpoint and the end user standpoint. And is this something that everyone in this city or everyone that I'm trying to reach can afford? And I think when you talk about sustainability, there's a price conversation too, and a certain demographic of people that maybe are left out of that conversation. So in trying to build this brand, I really am looking to touch on all three of those areas of sustainability. So our first local production, I guess. Can you hear me? Okay. So Our first local production project was with Lear Automotive, and so we worked with them to reuse some of their automotive leather overages to make lifestyle products. So we made this leather lunch bag idea, like a handbag. We also made a neoprene kind of puffy backpack that was made from auto seat covers. We're also working with local t-shirt manufacturers. We worked with Laszlo for a bit. We also, the tea that you're getting today is by Getty's, which is made in Sterling Heights, and it's a company that sources everything domestically, from their equipment to their packaging, to their fabrics, to their thread even. Everything is sourced here in the U.S. So we're just, a platform, a local brand that's really looking to work with the community, not just on a product standpoint, but in the retail space. How can we make retail more sustainable? And really coming from a buying background, I think that my ultimate passion is in the brick and mortar space, and how can I make this more sustainable, not just for small businesses, but for customers who are looking for a local product and looking for different ways to access retail and experience retail. So that's my background.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, as a customer, and we're all customers, we all consume fashion, I guess why should we value slow fashion? Should we value upcycling? And why, what value does the customer get out of slow fashion, or get out of sustainable products and things like that? And what would you say to that customer? Anyone that wants to start?
I'll start. Well, for me personally, I feel that I owe a duty to the earth. So for that reason, that's why I'm interested in sustainable fashion, because I think it's my responsibility not to do harm. Every customer doesn't have that mindset, but for the customers that do have that mindset, sustainable fashion is important because it promotes the health of the planet. For customers that don't have that mindset, I would say that sustainable fashion is still important because at least if you're coming to purchase my product, then in terms of aesthetics, you're getting something that is one of a kind, that is timeless. It's the only one like it, and you won't see it on anyone else, and it'll never go out of style. So those are the reasons that I think sustainability is important to everyone.
Yeah, I think there are a million reasons why you could do it. The one that I keep coming back to is that it feels good. And I think if you look at clothing, it's something that we put on every day. It impacts how we think about ourselves. It impacts how others perceive us. And it's a part of it's really a part of our emotional identity. And for me, it kind of came down to, I don't want to have, if I'm wearing something that's made in conditions that are completely against how I am trying to impact the world, I can't disconnect myself from that. That exists. That's true. And it was less about kind of sacrificing, now I can't buy as many things, or I can't have the latest trends, and more about, it feels really good and meaningful to have things in my life that I have a strong relationship with and that I feel proud about. So if clothing is part of how I portray myself to the world and it doesn't match up with my values, that's not comfortable and not kind of reaching the highest level of what clothing can do for us.
Sure. And I feel similarly to Christian. It's really goes down to your personal values. And I read something that said fast fashion people wear on an average of 5 times and keep for an average of 35 days, which is just, it's staggering. And to think, and then you think about, why are we doing it? So I don't think it's overproduction that's the problem. It's overconsumption, and it's changing the minds of people. And why am I buying these pieces? And why am I chasing these marketing campaigns that these brands are pushing to me? And really going back to, who am I? What do I stand for? And what is my personal style? And that's something that will last beyond whatever that current trend is. So it's reteaching people to think about who they are, what they stand for, and what that aesthetic is, so that it isn't always so in and out and so quickly moving.
I mean, we spend so much less of our overall income on clothing than we did even in the last few decades, but we buy so many more items. And it's this myth that somehow buying a ton of stuff will make us happy. And if fast fashion was somehow improving the quality of our lives and the quality of the world around us, maybe I would have a different answer, but it's not. So.
Sure.
So, I guess, do you think companies or corporations should be more transparent? And what does that look like?
I think it's just being that more transparent. So on the website, listing where your suppliers are coming from, really talking about what that process is and having that be readily available for customers. Also on your garments, there's generally an RN number on your tags or on your labels. So you can literally track that RN number online to see where that garment was made and really see what that factory looks like and how that was sourced. And so you can do that research yourself, but I think from a brand standpoint, there are ways to make that information more readily available.
Yeah, I mean, I think brands are going to have to compete. I don't know whether that's, a 20-year adoption curve or a 5-year adoption curve, but at some point, we see the market splitting between commodities and price-based decisions and then brands right now. And if you're going to be a brand, which is what all of us are aspiring to do, something more than just who can make it cheapest, there has to be a story and an emotional component to what you're doing. And I think, how I look at it is like, this is not the selling point, right? A brand's transparency shouldn't be the selling point, but it should be, we will hopefully get to the point where if it doesn't exist, a consumer will turn somewhere else. So it's more kind of like, to be a part of the market or to be considered as a brand, you have to do this, but it's not everything.
So I guess, would you think, if a company or corporation, if it's a marketing selling point, is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is that valuable, even though it's like their brand value or that's how they're selling their product? Do you get the question?
So, I mean, is there a lot of greenwashing out there, or are you saying, like, is it more, I mean, I think right now there are a lot of things that are being done that are more PR and marketing driven than actually changing the supply chain. And that's a problem because it confuses consumers, but it's also in part a reality that we're talking about an absolutely massive industry. I mean, the fashion industry is close to $3 trillion. And so, it's not easy if you look at how complex and large the industry is to all of a sudden, for $1 billion company to switch over its supply chain. So they are kind of starting to test and tell these stories and seeing how consumers respond. I mean, there's a lot of greenwashing out there, obviously, like that's unfortunate.
Would you define greenwashing for those of us who don't know exactly what that means?
Basically pretending that you're a lot more sustainable than you are, whether that's through buzzwords that are really hard to define or whether it's through ads that might imply something that's not a reality. I mean, I look at H&M as a classic example. They've got, I literally was in New York recently, and I came out of a panel that they had sponsored, and their head of sustainability had been speaking about all the cool things they were doing with recycling clothes and trying to source organic cotton. And then I walked by a window as I got out of the subway that said jeans $9.99, and there's a disconnect between that story that they're trying to portray and the reality of how they're making most of their money. And while I think that's a whole other conversation, which is, does this existing model have room? Can it turn, or does it need to go bankrupt and we need to start over? And that's maybe another discussion. But
well, it is challenging, for consumers to get the answers. I mean, you don't know. It's hard to track back and see. Even if it's organic cotton, you don't know that it hasn't been dyed with something that's toxic. So unfortunately, there is a lot of pressure on consumers who are committed to try to do the right thing. They still can't get all the answers. So I think it's important for us to understand that it's not just a matter of our buying choices, it's also about our political choices. I mean, we have to make bigger decisions about, about the whole system in order to make a difference.
So one of the things that you said that stood out, and it's something that I've learned and I've been researching, is like dyeing and like that process. So for a lot of people in the crowd, they might not know exactly how dyeing fabrics and things like that affects us. So could any of you talk about that and talk about how that affects us? I know both of you guys.
Well, it's not really my world because everything I dye with a plant. But I do know that typically if you go into a store and you buy retail and you buy something that's been dyed, that it's highly unlikely that it's dyed with an organic dye or with plant material. So, it's, I think there's like 8,000 different chemicals that are, or maybe more, 8,000 chemicals that are used in the manufacturing of clothes. So, that's a huge number. That's a lot of chemicals that are flowing into our oceans, and it can be almost overwhelming when you think about it. But I think that the thing that we have to do, if it's something that we're really passionate about, is change our mindset. Buy local, buy from someone that you know. Develop a relationship with makers. That's where it all starts. And if you can't do that, then I think that, when I look back at history, I mean, when you think about the fact that there was a time when you could get on a plane and someone was smoking a cigar, and that would never, ever, ever happen, that will never happen again. I have hope that at some point in the future, you can buy a garment and it really will be organic. You'll know it, you can trust it, and it'll be the truth. So it's just, it's one of those things. We do have power. It's all about us exerting our power.
Yeah, I mean, jumping in on the dyeing question. So with the T-shirts, we dyed some of them. We hand dyed them in natural indigo. It was a several thousand-year-old Japanese dyeing process where you take a natural fiber, you dip it in, you stir it around for 15 minutes, you take it out, you do that 5 more times, and you have this deep, rich shade of indigo that comes out of it. Unfortunately, it's really labor-intensive, and it's not color fast, so when it's exposed to light, it doesn't last. And so you're looking at trade-offs in terms of price, in terms of scalability, in terms of, is a garment that's dyed with chemicals but doesn't need to be re-dyed because it stays the same color for 25 years better than something that was naturally dyed but doesn't keep its color? There are all these kind of questions that you're wrestling with as you're doing it. But I know that a big piece of it is not just in the chemicals that are used, but the types of how the factories are operating that are using those chemicals. So there's a big difference between a factory that's cleaning its water and collecting it after it's being dyed and it's being cleaned before it's either reused or sent into back into the water system, or what they do a lot in China, where they joke that you can tell the color of the season by what color the rivers are. So you're talking, China and Bangladesh and some of these countries that are doing a serious amount of the garment production in the U.S. that are just discharging straight from dyeing facilities directly into water that is being used for drinking and bathing, and yeah.
I just want to go back to something you mentioned, Christian, when you said H&M. Of course, they have their sort of health or their conscious line or whatever it is that's made and manufactured domestically, but then they have their $9.99 jeans. I think, just going back to that, it's a price conversation, and I think that the sustainability conversation has almost become this elite thing where only a certain demographic or group of people can participate based on the prices that domestic production can push product to. So, even in the way H&M has kind of segmented their lines, we've sort of done the same thing. I mean, we have tees that are made, over in Malaysia, and then we have those that are made domestically. And when you put them in front of a customer and say, this one is $29 and this one is $68 or $64 or whatever it is, no matter how much the customer cares, sometimes they're going to buy that $29 T-shirt. So I think it's an education moment as well. So have you found that even with Laszlo, I know your price points were pretty high. Was there some pushback, even though there was the sustainability element to the brand?
I think you're hitting such an important part of this conversation. For us, our price points are sky high and going higher, and that has less to do with being sustainable than being a luxury product. So we're using, I'm wearing one of our samples right now. We're working with an absolutely amazing linen mill in Belgium. We're working with some of the world's best cashmere. And so our prices are high purely because of the materials, not the sustainability piece of it. And so, that's a personal spot where we hit because of the products that I'm trying to make. I think if you look at the
market, you're seeing, I think, a lot of progress toward more sustainable options at different price points, and I think that's vital. I don't know where we draw the line between like this is unacceptably cheap and the only way that you get there is by serious cutting corners. I think $9.99 denim is below that line wherever it is. And I think we have a conversation about, you know, what is a fair price point, and are you buying based on what's logical? And where does that, you know, if you're like, okay, I have this amount to spend, here's what I can possibly afford, versus the luxury market where price is less of an issue than story.
Right.
I mean, I hope that we can do stuff at every price point. I also don't think that we all have a right to a ton of stuff. I know that I've bought a lot less and spent more. Recently, I know that not everyone has the choice to purchase expensive, sustainable items. I mean, my hope is that we get to a point where, I mean, right now it's up to the people that have the opportunity to make choices, and that I think includes a lot more people than we think, but it's not everyone. It's not the responsibility of people who can't afford something to buy it, but for those of us who can afford to make choices to think a whole lot more seriously about what we're buying.
I think there's also an opportunity for us to change our mindset about what is affordable. You know, so I could go to H&M and buy $5, $10 t-shirts that are not sustainable. I mean, you know, they won't wear well, they won't look good, I'll have to buy 5 more next year. Or I could go to Detroit is the New Black and buy a $50 t-shirt that will last me for several years. You know, so that's a conversation that we have to have with ourselves. But also, the other thing that makes me hopeful is changes in technology. So when I was getting ready for this panel, I did a lot of reading that I wouldn't have otherwise done. And you know, there's waterless dyeing now, where there's no dispersal of toxins into the environment, which is amazing. There's laser pattern making, where there's no wastage of fabric. You know, so there are lots of things that are coming that haven't quite made it to the mass market yet, but I think that in time, you know, that's going to happen.
Definitely.
So I want to jump into that in a second, but I want to dive back to a point that you made earlier about how it's not just in purchasing decisions, but it's political decisions. It's kind of clothing is part of a much larger system. So I did my university research on prison policy, and one of the things that I noticed is that there's a pretty strong correlation between how many jobs we shipped overseas and how many people were in prison. And if you kind of pull back some of the layers, you see that as we were shipping manufacturing jobs, whether it's clothing or otherwise, you know, people were falling into poverty and into crime because that's what happens when people lose their jobs. And there's a pretty strong argument to be made that our decision to chase cheap labor overseas and lower prices led to poverty at home, which leads to crime, which leads to higher prison population, which leads to all kinds of community impacts. And saying these are all, what people can afford is not tied into just their purchasing decisions, but what their economic opportunity looks like. And so, you know, for us, it's always been about how are we impacting the people that we employ, and how are we impacting their ability to make choices about how they live their life versus, you know, that's for us saying that's the group we're going to serve versus, I mean, we're hopefully serving customers, but saying, you know, you have to pick and choose your battles. And for us, it was less about how many people can afford it, but what can we do that makes a beautiful product and change the lives of the people that we're working with. And then totally switching gears into technology. I mean, this is what gives me a lot of hope, and one of the reasons why I've been diving into the investment space is that whether you're looking at 3D knitting that doesn't create waste, whether you're looking at you know, digital cutting, whether you're looking at recycling technologies for fibers, you're seeing a lot of innovation that will do a couple things. One, bring manufacturing closer to the end consumer, which is great. And I mean, speaking of H&M again, they just announced they had $4.3 billion in unsold inventory right now, which is financially a disaster, but also a whole lot of toxic chemicals and materials that are sitting wasted. So this new technology will make things more efficient and have less waste, bring manufacturing closer to the end consumer, which hopefully means creating regional jobs, but also at the same time is going to cut jobs in other parts of the world. So it's not a there's a complex conversation there.
Yeah, I had a quick question, because one thing you said, you talked about the waste, and that's one thing I researched and I learned a lot about that. Could you talk about that, like polyesters and things like that, how that affects us? So how much does the waste and the unsold products, how does that affect us moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think most things that we make create waste in some way, especially garments that you're cutting out. You can make patterns as efficiently as possible, and hopefully you use most of the fabric that you make. Whether it's pre-consumer or post-consumer, there are a lot of people that are working on recycling technologies. So some of that is just, taking a shirt that's been stained and re-dyeing it so that it's a perfectly good shirt that's a new color instead of stained. There's also, a company out in Seattle that's working to break down cotton waste at the molecular level, turn it into, they can take an old t-shirt, break it down into a liquid, reform the molecules and extrude it, basically turning it in, it's like making pasta, but with fibers, and turn it into new yarns. So you're looking at, instead of throwing away tons and tons of fabric every year, there's something like 13 or 16 million tons of fabric that's thrown away in the U.S. every year. Rather than having to recreate that from scratch every year, being able to use those old fibers and turning it into new yarns.
It's brilliant.
So for you, Mendes and Roslyn, I would like to know, what's your decision process for what fabrics you use? How do you vet manufacturers and things? How do you go into the ethical process of being a designer to find those sustainable places, to find those organic places, so you can create the best product?
Sure. I prefer natural fibers for the most part, so a lot of cottons. We use hemp-based products. We work with a company out in LA called Young Maven, and so they do primarily hemp-based product. We work with Groceries Apparel, also out in LA, that does 100% organic cotton. So those are our two main suppliers, and then locally, like I said, we work with Lear and their recycled leather and auto textiles. So really, I approach it from a standpoint of what do we have here? Who are the suppliers and the organizations that I'd like to work with, and what sort of lifestyle products can we make that are in line with the brand? So that's really how I'm thinking about materials.
For me, everything I make is either wool or silk. And I primarily use a supplier out of Ohio Valley Fibers, for my roving. And this is roving. I really like what I do because it is truly zero waste. There is nothing ever wasted. If I make something and I don't like the way it turned out, then I can cut it up and make it into something else. There's no sewing involved in my work, so I'm not cutting any patterns. Everything I do is seamless. So for me, it's different, it's different than sewing or manufacturing in the traditional sense. So that's one reason why I like what I do, because I'm not wasting. I'm one of those people who doesn't want to. I'm like the most passionate recycler ever. I don't want to throw anything away. And so this is work that allows me to do just that. I don't ever have to throw anything away.
Good.
Could you talk about felting? And a lot of people in the crowd, I know for me, when we first had a conversation, I had to look up felting and things like that. Could you actually go over the process of felting and what that looks like?
So felting is an ancient technique. It's like thousands of years old. And basically, it's a process of taking wool fibers, and I need two hands. Thank you. So it's a process of taking the fiber and pulling it off in really fine wisp, kind of like that, and laying those little wisps of fabric down in layers and wetting and rolling and rubbing them until they all become one. So if you were to look at the roving under a microscope, you would see that there's little scales on the fabric. It's kind of like dreadlocks. So you would see scales, and the water, the rubbing, the adding a little soap to change the alkalinity, that causes those scales to lock together. And that's how this becomes one of those things up there, or this, or this. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a very labor-intensive process. There are times when I wonder why did I think this was a good idea? But I really love it because, as I said before, it's virtually impossible to make the same thing twice. I mean, if you make something, you can never make anything that is exactly the same as that other thing that you made. So that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, so what's the value of, I know you talked about how you recycle and you never waste any products. So what's the value of upcycling and what's the future of upcycling look like?
Well, I think the value is using materials that would otherwise go in the landfill, and you know, upcycling for me, and I'm kind of an energy person, so I believe that clothes and fabric and these things carry energy, and so when you're upcycling something, you certainly, you know, the leather bags that we've recycled, automotive leather, and I think that's just a beautiful way to kind of revive the history of the city and carry this textile that once meant this one thing, but reshape it into something new and give it a new energy and a new life, essentially. I think that's, for me, what upcycling is and why it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, in many ways, it's just mimicking the rest of the natural systems on Earth where things get used over and over again instead of wasted. The idea of waste is this human construct that's kind of crazy if you think about it. But it's also going to be a necessity. I mean, they expect the number of garments in the industry to somewhere between double and triple by 2030 in terms of production. And cotton production has stayed steady for the last 20 years because we've kind of run out of cropland for cotton. And at some point, cotton is a very, very water-intensive crop. It takes somewhere around 1,500 gallons of water to make a pair of jeans between the growing and the finishing and the dyeing. And so, you know, Levi's, one of the biggest jeans makers in the world, has identified water usage as one of their biggest fears or biggest threats to the company, because growing cotton at some point will come into conflict with drinking water, which is not a battle from a PR standpoint that most companies want to fight. So Levi's has invested in this company out of Seattle that's doing fiber recycling, because that fiber recycling process saves 98% of the water that it would take to create new cotton. So I think upcycling is not just kind of this feel-good environmental story, but it's also going to be an economic argument. And I think it may introduce new business models around who owns materials. If materials somehow have value, that may change whether we throw this T-shirt away or not. So it opens up a whole other set of conversations, but I think it's going to play a very, very big role in the fashion industry in the next decade.
Could you guys talk about cotton and 100%? I know everything we like products 100% organic, and could you talk about what does that mean? Does that mean less water? What does 100% organic products mean for the environment exactly? Like, what's the process of that? Because that's something I'm really
100% organic. I mean, it just means it was living and breathing element that can go back into the earth. So essentially, if it's organic, it came from the earth and it'll go back to the earth. And I think that's the easiest way to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mandy, you talked about it. Or the organic certification, depending on what certification it is, may refer just to how it was grown using no pesticides, but it may also refer to how it was dyed and finished and what chemicals were used in the entire process. And there are trade-offs. So organic cotton yields less cotton per acre than GMO cotton or cotton that's grown with pesticides. So there's no kind of one right answer. So like, I made a decision with a white T-shirt to start with cotton and organic cotton because I didn't want to use chemicals in the supply chain, and because cotton is a wonderful, breathable, comfortable material. But it uses a lot of water, and you know, there's no material out there that's perfect. But for me, it's a material that we know we can make without chemicals, that we have access to in the States, and that is long-lasting, durable, and comfortable. And I know, I mean, you're a big fan of cotton, and similar reasons, I would think.
Same.
But yeah.
Yep.
Okay, one last question. And it's one thing that I want to know, and I'm pretty sure everyone in the crowd wants to know, is what can we do right now as consumers to educate ourselves to be more involved in sustainable fashion, to make a change for the future?
I think the first thing we can do is be willing to make a difference. And once we have decided that we want to make a difference, then we have to be more thoughtful about all of our choices. And based on my experience in getting ready for this, Google is your friend. I mean, there's so many resources available and things that you don't know. So there's lots of information out there that will help you to evolve your thinking. So we can look at labels. We can buy better products. We can buy locally. We can go to thrift stores. We can give things away instead of throwing them away. There's so much that we can do.
First thing, I would go on Google and Google slow fashion. So there, I think her name is Kate Fletcher. Wrote an article back, this was 2007, she sort of coined this term, slow fashion, and it was based on this slow food movement that happened in the 80s, and basically it was this idea that you're really thinking about what you're putting into your body, you're really having this conversation with the food and all of that, and so slow fashion was kind of a spinoff on that. But I would encourage you to read that article, think about what you're wearing, and support sustainable fashion. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Really buy and talk about it and evangelize about it on these social platforms, and let your friends and your communities know that it's a thing we need to pay attention to going forward.
So other than stopping by these two wonderful women's stores in Detroit, which you can do locally, I mean, for me, when I first kind of found out about this stuff, I felt guilty. I was like, I have participated in this, and I don't think guilt is really the answer. I think it comes back to kind of where we started, which was find ways to wear clothing that represents who you are and feels good. I think there's a lot of information out there about how screwed up the fashion industry is, and it's a rabbit hole that you can go down and get really frustrated or upset and feel guilty, but that's not what's going to change things. So look for things that are exciting and new and positive that you want to go tell your friends about. And then I have a question that I like to pose and keep coming back to myself, but it's how many of you could not buy anything for the next month and still have clothes to wear? The next year, would you be naked in a year? So we're sitting. So we're all in the position where we have the power of choice, right? We don't have to go out tomorrow to buy something. We have things in our closet, and that gives us, I think, a little bit of time to think, and so to step back and say, what really do I want in my life? What really do I want in my closet? How can I support companies that stand for what I stand for? And then you've got time to kind of build slowly towards a better wardrobe. I think for me, it was the first impulse was to throw everything out and then try to replace it, and I couldn't afford that, but it's also, the most sustainable clothes are the ones that are already in your closet. So start there and then fill in with pieces that you feel great about rather than feeling like you have to change everything at once.
All right, so
don't give in to the hype.
Yes.
Don't follow the trend.
All right, so we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions to these beautiful panelists, we can open it up for right now. Are we starting from the front?
Hi, my name is Evan. Thank you. Hello. I kind of want to know what was kind of the light bulb that clicked for you guys about sustainable fashion, because I know like everybody in here was not thinking about that prior to, like our parents would buy us clothes or like we would get clothes as a gift. So what kind of set it off as to be like, wow, the clothes that I have on right now are not really good for the environment and I need to change that?
For me, it was the garbage bags of clothes I was giving away. Just like every season, I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot of clothes. I'm trying to find people to give them to, and they don't want them. Like, this is a lot, cycling through every 6 months or so. And so for me, that was just a wake-up call. As you get older, you start to change your style and just the way that you do things. And so for me, I thought personally, if, I would die if someone was giving away a Detroit is the New Black t-shirt in one of these bags. So I have to make sure that the product that I'm putting out is something that they can keep for longer, than a year or 2 years, and something that will really become a staple. Even, as far as from a design standpoint, not pushing new products so frequently, I think has been something I've been really cognizant of. I want people to know that we're a classic brand and a staple brand. It's something that will always be what it is, and not something that they have to get the new color or get the new, logo every month. And I didn't want to just have that effect on fashion as a brand. And so that's sort of been my personal wake-up call.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a hard question for me to answer. I mean, I can't say that there was some defining moment for me. I've always liked vintage things, so that's something that I've been doing, for decades, is finding wonderful old things that speak to me. And I can't say that I don't sometimes fall into the trap, even though I have a commitment in my heart to doing the right thing. I might wander into a store and see something that's marked down from $100 to $20, and I'm like, oh, I gotta have it, So I think I'm saying this to myself, when I say be more thoughtful. I'm still on that journey myself.
So I think for me it was kind of two things. The first was when Rana Plaza collapsed in Bangladesh in 2013. It was a garment factory that killed over 1,000 workers when it fell apart, and that was kind of part of a series of 3 of the 4 largest tragedies in the garment industry happened in a year and a half. And so when Rana Plaza happened, it really spurred the kind of first step, which was, this is really screwed up. And then I started doing research and got involved in a sustainable fashion show, and was just really not inspired by the stories and the products, especially in the men's market. And so the kind of first piece was, this is really screwed up, and the second piece was, I think there's room for not just one, but a whole lot of people to be coming at this and trying to make things that people really respond to on a story and a product design standpoint. Those two things really were important for me. And going back to one thing you can do, this is about shopping in general, sorry to go all the way back, or one of the things you can do is buy stuff that you love. So just because it's a good deal, if it doesn't fit, you're never gonna wear it. Buy things that look good, feel good, and don't get seduced by it being the cool trend or whatever it is. But that's for me the kind of if it doesn't fit, I cannot, I will not let myself buy it, because it has to start there.
We have an next question.
Yes, my name is Franca, and thanks for being here this evening. There was a time when a lot of things were made here in the U.S. clothing-wise, and you had jobs for pattern makers and sewers, and we had manufacturing done here. How do you see slow fashion impacting that? Because one of you said that if we do slow fashion, it's going to impact jobs overseas. Do you think that it will help to bring some of that manufacturing back to the U.S.?
I think it will, partly, but I think also it will move from sort of that cut and sew or sewers mentality more to technology. So I think the jobs will open up in that coding sector or engineering or new processes into production, and not necessarily that sewing model like it was previously.
Yeah, I think the jobs are going to look different. I think we're working on some initiatives to try to bring manufacturing back, but it's less how can we recreate what was here 40, 50 years ago, and more what does the future look like. So my ultimate vision for the industry is that we get away from having a handful of places that do massive production halfway across the globe and have smaller production centers distributed around the country and around the world, so that you and I are wearing things that are made locally. Even if if someone designs it in India and goes online, there's software being developed right now, and a company that's working on this, where you could go online and click order on a sweater, and that order would be routed to the nearest knitting facility that has the right yarn and made on demand. So you're moving from these kind of massive production hubs that produce well in advance a long ways away to smaller hubs that respond to demand and produce close to the consumer. And the hope is then that we have regional manufacturing jobs and opportunities, and that so you may get rid of these massive factories, but then Detroit and LA and New York and Cleveland each have their own hub where you need technology, and so we can both create more jobs, but also hopefully create regional identities again. So everyone's looking at the same Instagrams, working at the same factories, but if we have designers that are closer to production and production that are closer to consumers, hopefully that we can start making things that are a little bit more unique and tied into the place where they're made.
Follow up to that, if you don't mind. You just said something about a sweater. You can order a sweater and it goes to the closest factory.
Yep.
My background is in technical design. How do you control fit if you are buying from someone where you don't know what their measurements are, or how is that controlled?
Custom fit's a whole other world. So the company that I'm talking about they own some IP or some patents around custom fitting of sweaters. Thankfully, sweaters you have a little bit more flexibility than say a woven garment. But the idea would be that you have these knitting facilities, and based on the the website, whatever size you click the pattern automatically goes straight to the 3D knitting machine that spits out the same the sweater that you need. There would be opportunities to input your own measurements if you wanted, but that doesn't have to be a part of it.
And I say develop relationships with artisans. We are everywhere. And you'd be surprised at how economical it can be to buy from someone who is making a garment just for you.
Any more questions?
And how much fun.
And how much fun.
So you all have talked a lot about the beginning parts of a garment, right? How the construction happens and the business model behind that and how it's sustainable. And you mentioned, I think, Rosalind, you said 100% organic, it comes from the earth and it can go back to the earth. But a lot of times, yes, we're donating our clothes, we're giving it to friends, we're doing clothing swaps, but at the end of the day, if something has a bleach stain on it or some sort of thing, we're throwing it out or we are turning it into dish rags. It's like those two options. And if it is 100% organic cotton and it's going to a landfill, it's not really going back to the earth. So I don't know if you have any insight into kind of what we can do or what options are for actually recycling fabric that's beyond donating it, giving it away, turning it into dish rags.
And I think for those things, potentially is finding one of those recycling facilities similar to what Christian mentioned earlier. There are also certain brands that actually will take their own clothes back and recycle them. Brands like Patagonia, I know they do. Eileen Fisher, I think, has a program as well. But certainly there are also just general recycling centers that will take these textiles back and recycle them into new textiles or new yarns and things like that.
And these are technologies that are just being tested right now to kind of move from this is a cool idea to this is something that we're doing at scale with millions of tons of fabric every year. So I think it's exciting what's coming. The short-term answer is what Rosalind said, and then hopefully, we're able to make progress on the larger scale initiatives.
Great. Can we give a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you all. Thank you all so much. That was incredible. These folks are going to stick around for a bit. I just want to make sure we get to go back to screen printing. Thank you again for coming. Please come back for the next intersection, which is going to be on May 24th. And the theme of that is exploring technology and surveillance and media technology and queer radicalism. So please join us again. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.